I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I will point out, though, the elephant in the room. Being last has some disadvantages to it. Number one, there's probably nothing I'll talk about that hasn't at least been touched upon at least once by one of the other speakers. And of course, the biggest downside of going last is I'm the only thing between you and some adult beverages. So I will try to be as brief as possible. We'll expound where we need to expound, but I'm certainly going to be available afterwards for further discussion. But before I jump into our topic, I want to discuss, just for 2 minutes, a single slide, who Marabou is, who's our company, what's our profile look like. 160 years old. We're celebrating that anniversary this year. We are a family-owned business, still owned by the same families. We manufacture screen inks, pad inks, digital inks, coatings, solvent, water-based, and UV. Just introduced a new water-based pad printing ink within the past month. We've got greater than 500 employees worldwide. We've got 16 subsidiaries, of them Marabou North America, which I've been responsible for as a general manager for the last 8 years. And general manager means that you know a little bit about a lot of things, but nothing that you know in depth. So a lot of this content comes from my colleagues who know a lot more about it than I do. The reason I point out this company profile is that we have experts, just like there's many experts that are in this room. And if I can connect you, whether it be to purchase our products or just to make you more successful, I don't care either way. I can connect you with some folks that have got unbelievable levels of expertise when it comes to the printing industry. So feel free to reach out at any time. Oh, and the last point, Marabou Canada, we just opened a new branch up in Mississauga earlier this year, and they're humming along, increasing their presence up there. This is a fun fact. On average, every human on the face of the earth touches Marabou products 7 times a day. We did the math. We're on so many different things, from automotive to medical to apparel to the pen that you got in your hand to the keyboard that's on this computer. We're literally everywhere. And that's, for a small company the size of ours, that's kind of an interesting factoid. And as I mentioned, we've got a lot of experts, so feel free to tap Marabou as an organization if we can be of any type of assistance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a success story, which is the evolution of glass printing from what it used to be to what's becoming very much mainstream, and that is digital printing onto glass. When you talk about technological advancements or product development life cycles, you run into a whole lot of, well, it just makes sense financially. The technologies come up the curve to a point where it now rivals other technologies for various reasons, and it just depends on the technology. But in this case, we got a little bit of a bump. We got a little bit of a help. And that came from not necessarily a change in legislation, but a change in the interpretation of legislation. What am I talking about? I would imagine that just about everybody in this room is familiar with what happened about 9 years ago when McDonald's was putting out, I guess as part of a Happy Meal, these Shrek-themed glasses. Somebody somewhere decided that they were going to test them. They tested positive for levels of lead and cadmium, and they had to recall 12 million of these glasses. But based on what you heard all day today, and based upon what you know, is anybody surprised that they found lead and cadmium in these decorated glasses? No. I mean, heavy metals exist in organic inks. So what's the problem? What's the big deal? The problem is that the subject matter got a little too close to a neighboring market segment, and that is children's toys. And if you are in the ink business, and you're not even just the ink business, but if you do anything with children's toys, you know that you have got very, very strict regulations. And one could interpret this product is intended for a child. So therefore, shouldn't the laws apply for children's toys? And McDonald's said, out of an abundance of caution, we're going to recall these 12 million items. And that's exactly what they did. So would there have been liability? Who knows? That would have been for the courts to decide. But what do you think the brand owners have done as a result of this? We got to find an alternative. We got to find an alternative that is free of heavy metals. So certainly, the inorganic ceramic pigments have a place in the market. There are plenty of market segments that they're absolutely effective. But in this particular market segment, drinkware, we were given a little bit of a boost, pushed in that direction. So just a little bit about ceramic versus UV. Again, this is one of the topics that I couldn't even shine a light compared to what's been discussed already. But as I already mentioned, inorganic pigments, they can contain heavy metals. Their base requires a melt point of greater than 1,000 degrees. So therein lies the benefit. You're not getting this stuff off. You're fusing the two materials together and they're just not gonna come off. So there's, like I said, plenty of applications for this technology. When you look at UV inks, you got prepolymers, you got monomers, you got photoinitiators, you got additives, magic dust, and you've got organic pigments. Now, organic pigments primarily come from plants. You can do all kinds of interesting things like fluorescence and neon colors and metallics and all kinds of stuff, and again, without heavy metals. So, just looking at the process of UV, if you look at your printed film at the top, it consists of UV binders, UV monomers, and photoinitiators. You hit them with a certain wavelength of light, and what happens? Your photoinitiators release free radicals. And those free radicals begin a chain reaction, a chemical reaction that occurs known as polymerization. And instantaneous, yes, you can touch it. It goes from a liquid to a solid just like that. But for those of you that are doing any kind of UV printing, full cure is going to require 12 to 24 hours. That's why most folks wait 24 hours until they do their adhesion tests. And that process can be accelerated a bit. So, the thing that's kind of unique when you talk about UV inks, the monomer and prepolymer selection, your raw materials that you're picking, they determine the kind of polymer chains that are created after the reaction occurs. Okay? So follow me here for a second. The length and the structure of those polymer chains will dictate how this stuff performs, the performance characteristics. So why is that important? This is a six-way graph showing the differences, performance characteristic differences between a rigid UV ink and a flexible. In the case of the left, you've got great reactivity, excellent resistance, you've got very good lack of odor, for lack of a better term, but you're going to suffer in adhesion and flexibility. Contrastingly, if you formulate using different polymers and photoinitiators, you're going to end up with a very different performing ink. So why is that important for what I'm about to talk about, which is digital? Digital, just because you find a combination of raw materials that gives you the performance characteristics you're looking for, doesn't mean it's going to jet. You've got a whole lot of stuff beyond that you have to worry about. Particle size, viscosity, of course, photoelasticity of the final ink formulation, etc. So there are inherent challenges in the digital world that require some extra steps. That simple. So, just looking at the digital printing process for a second. You've got your pre-treatment process, and I couldn't hold a candle to yours either. In fact, you'll see two of pictures from your slides earlier, but I'm just going to go right on by those because you covered it in sufficient detail. This primer step, right now today, I'm not aware of any ink on the market, digital ink, that you can achieve the type of performance that you need. And again, that's market specific. If you're printing a whole bunch of wedding glasses that are only going to go on a shelf somewhere and sit there, not going to go through the dishwasher a whole bunch of times, you can get away with it, no problem. But if you're going to talk about putting it through the dishwasher and using it over and over and over again, you've got to do some type of primer on the surface. Today, that primer can be sprayed on or it can be wiped on. Once that primer's been established, then you start your traditional printing process. White, CMYK, and then an overprint varnish. In the case of the vast majority of ink manufacturers, this is your process. I know of one off the top of my head that takes that varnish and puts it on the other side of the process. But for all intents and purposes, this is the digital printing process when it comes to glass. So, here I jump into pre-treatment. Like I said, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because Sean has done an excellent job already describing what it does. Now, when it comes to these various steps, you get the question all the time, which one can I skip? Naturally. How much faster can I make this go? Well, when you combine your pre-treatment, which is Pyrosil, and you combine it with your primer, the two of them are multiplicative in nature. What I mean by that, if you don't do either one, you digitally print on glass, you put it through a residential dishwasher, what do you think you're going to have when you pull it out? You got a nice clean glass with nothing on it. All that ink's going to be in the filter. But if you do a Pyrosil treatment by itself and skip the primer, you're probably going to get about 10. About 10. If you skip the Pyrosil and you do just the primer, surprisingly, you can get as many as 50. I've seen 60 even. You put the two of them together, 10 times 50 or 60, you're looking at 500 or 600 wash cycles from a digitally printed UV ink. Yes, it exists. So, again, another great slide, not stolen, borrowed. There's been a lot of discussion on this topic. Industry standards, industry standards. What is an industry standard when it comes to wash testing, dishwasher testing specifically? Does anybody know what it is? No, you don't, because it doesn't exist, right? We did find one. Well, before I jump to that, let's talk about adhesion for a second. Everybody's got their own adhesion test, either a tape test or a crosshatch test or some way to make sure that, hey, is this going to come back to haunt me if I ship this to my customer? So everybody's got some method of adhesion, and there are ASTM standards for them. I've seen people use exactly the ASTM standard. I've seen them use their own. Whatever works for you, obviously you want to stick with it. But when it comes to dishwasher fastness, the only thing we've been able to find is this one that's based in Europe. And an institute over there, an independent test lab called Reckitt Benckiser, uses this, and they have a specific dishwasher at a specific temperature with a specific pH of the water, with a specific detergent, so on and so forth. And that is what our colleagues in Europe decided that they were going to use as the standard, and that is the standard that we strive to when we do all of our testing. Most of you probably just use your own household dishwasher, which is probably just fine. But it's important to note, this goes all the way up to 80 minutes. 80 minutes of being subjected to time and temperature. I'll talk about it here in just a minute, but that is killer. I would rather, if I had to pass a test, I would much rather subject our inks on glass to a commercial dishwasher. Even though it's hotter, it's much shorter duration. This is much more difficult to test or to pass. So the result, as I mentioned, you look at the reference, you look at the after 400 cycles on both of these, the results are identical. You can't see any degradation whatsoever. However, a word of caution, that's this. If you take a glass that has been subjected to high heat, high humidity, is the moment you pull it out, it's going to be at its lowest adhesion state. You can scrape that stuff off if you go digging in it. If you wait about 2 hours, it regains the original adhesion that it once had. So don't go grab your dishwasher out and start scrubbing it right away, because that's where you're going to see a bit of a falling out. So just a little bit about a couple of reference projects that have existed. Canon, there's a company in Europe called PSL. And I have to say that we probably wouldn't have gotten the opportunity that we have had in this particular segment if it hadn't been for that company. They've been a customer of ours for many, many years, very loyal to us. In fact, when Cayman developed their digital printing press, PSL said, we'll take one, but it has to have Marabou ink in it. Now, obviously, it had to perform to a certain standard, but we were given a lot of chances to develop products in their facility that we wouldn't have otherwise had because PSL demanded it. So they're running 2 digital presses over there now that are unbelievably fast. I was out at their facility and I tried to keep up with the glass station to station as it was being printed. I couldn't do it. I mean, it was really flying. So if that's your, I'll get to this one too. There's another industrial printer, single pass. It's known as the TIL project that we have internally. There are several of these systems in existence already in the States that are still in a demo or beta test mode. But in the very near future, these things are going to hit mainstream. So all of your major bottlers, canning companies, you're going to find that you can suddenly pick your beverage customized for your use. So just like you can go online and upload a graphic and put it on a golf ball and have it within 24 hours, you can expect the same thing in the near future on aluminum cans, glass bottles, plastic bottles, with whatever you want on them. So we're in a very interesting and exciting time when it comes to digital and glass and other material decoration. Within North America, came in, just received last week, I believe, their first digital, this is in the United States, up at their facility in the Northeast. They're dialing it in now. We have our friends with the Bottle Jet from Pad Printer Vermont. Also, some kudos to the XD360, much faster version. And of course, I can't leave out this printer by ICN, the Helix, which has been, from a market share perspective, probably one of the most successful printer platforms that's out there. So, when it comes to future advances, how do we get this even more mainstream? As I mentioned, this primer step is the one that people are always asking, how can I cut this out? Well, by the middle of 2019, that primer, which can now only today be wiped on or sprayed on, it will be incorporated into the hardware and will be jettable. A UV curable version of this primer will be available. In fact, PSL is already printing it. They've been printing it for 6 months. So as soon as we get through all of our additional testing, that'll be available on the market by the middle of 2019. Did I go fast enough? Burn through it. Questions?
Through which print heads?
Right now it is being jetted through the ZAR head, and it is in end fire mode without recirculation. It's important because this stuff is unbelievably reactive when it comes to air and moisture. So even the presence of it at the surface of the print head has been problematic for us. So we've had to make some modifications, but it's right now being jetted through the ZAR head.
Reactive meaning it's drying right away, so what does it have, a white process? And
it is reacting with moisture in the air, believe it or not.
So once it leaves.
Yes.
So you mentioned, I saw somewhere that Marabou inks can replace other inks available, right, by the manufacturers. Do you specify certain heads which could use Marabou inks? Like, for example, you say, oh, if you've got a machine with a ZAR head, no problem. You got Ricoh or, Konica and Alta, that's how other people. So is there specifications with regard to heads and your ink?
Certainly. We've got certifications on many of the major head suppliers that are out there today.
Okay.
We don't deal with the low viscosity heads. When I say low viscosity, Epson specifically, we don't do much with them. But Ricoh on up, there's probably none that you could mention that we don't have either certification or good performance through.
So Ricoh 5th Gen is not a problem?
Not at all.
Konica 1024 is not a
Correct.
problem? Toshiba's?
Yes, we're also running on the Toshibas as well.
Toshiba's is also not a problem.
Now, it's not all the same formulation. We've got
Correct.
different formulation for different
But you
heads.
will have an ink available for that,
Correct.
and that's for glass, specifically for glass, or is it a general ink?
We like to call our ink a middle-of-the-road ink. In fact,
Okay.
the ink that I'm just now talking about for glass has really good adhesion onto plastic. So rather than have two different versions for two different substrates, we're targeting a single ink for multiple substrates.
Yeah. The other question I have about the durability, you talked about, what is the adhesion standards? I come from a promo world. To me, I mean, you can have 500 or 800 adhesions, but is the customer willing to pay for it?
Right.
At the end of the day.
Yep.
To me, I think if you can get, say, 60 to 100 dishwashers on a moderate level,
Yep.
you are good.
Yes.
Would you suggest that for 60 to 100 dishwashers, do you still need a primer or Pyrosil, or just a flake treatment with your ink?
What I've seen from just Pyrosil,
Okay.
it doesn't quite get you 50 or 60. You could probably, you don't want to hear this, you could probably skip the Pyrosil and go with just the primer and get yourself to fix 50 or 60.
Yeah.
And you're right, in the promotional world, that's enough. You don't need more than that.
Yeah.
But if you're talking bars, restaurants, things like that, you got to add both.
Correct, yeah. And that's,